Hi, I'm Joe McCaffrey. I am in the Performing and Literary Arts track directed by Dr. Cioffari, and this is my honors thesis. It is entitled Conversations in Jazz. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the project. The project itself is essentially an album. It's a recording with 6 selections. And the project marks many first times for me. It's my first time delving into the worlds of composing and arranging. I have 2 of my own compositions on here, and the other 4 are works composed by other people which I arranged myself, which means that I've fit the instrumentation for my purposes. Maybe I tweak some of the melody or the harmony. Arranging is essentially taking another person's work and sort of making it your own while still retaining the defining features that make it someone else's composition. And it's also my first time as band leader, which means that I'm selecting the works and picking the musicians, and it's my name that if this were to be released, it would be my name on top of the project, which it is. And the arrangements that I did are for both trio, which is piano, bass, and drums played by myself, and quintet, which is piano, bass, drums, plus the addition of a saxophone and trumpet. Here I've listed the 6 selections on the project. I'll just go through them real quick. They're organized by the instrumentation. So the first 2 are the quintet arrangements. So I have on the left is the composition and on the right is the composer. So the first song, Tad's Delight, composed by jazz arranger and pianist Tad Dameron. This has been recorded by countless famous jazz musicians through the years. I did an arrangement for quintet, which was based off the Miles Davis quintet arrangement of the same song. On the Trail by Ferda Grafe is from the Grand Canyon Suite. It's originally a classical piece, but has been redone again by jazz musicians going back to the 1960s. And this I didn't really base off of any particular arrangement because I couldn't find any with my instrumentation, but I arranged this for my quintet as well. And then the trio songs, of which there are 4, They Didn't Believe Me. It was composed by Jerome Kern in 1914. So it's originally not a jazz song. It kind of predates jazz. I guess it would just kind of be American popular music, but it's been recorded by numerous jazz artists. Londonderry Air is a traditional Irish song, also known as Danny Boy. I wanted to try to arrange it for the trio to see if we could take, everyone kind of knows it as in its sort of hymn-like folk tradition, and I wanted to see if we could make it kind of swing and turn it into a sort of jazzed up rendition of it, so you can judge for yourself if we were successful. And then finally, my 2 original compositions. One is entitled Olivia, and the other one is entitled Train to Morocco. I'm just going to quickly go through some of the arrangements, some of the charts these are the actual charts that I brought in for the band, and kind of go through the process of how I would arrange this with the group. So, for example, this is all I brought into the rehearsal for the quintet. And so this is the chart that everybody was reading off of. And basically, what we did was, if you listen to the recording, the arrangement that we work out is there's a drum intro, and then the piano, bass, and drums play the first 16 bars, which is half of the melody. We play those together without the horns, and then the second 16 bars, the horns come in. And then we kind of play through the tune, just standard people soloing over the form, and then on the melody out we do the inverse of what it was on the way in. So for the first half it's the whole band with the horns playing, and the second half is just piano, drums, and bass. You wouldn't get that just by looking at this chart. This is just what you call a lead sheet, which means all it has are the chord changes above the measures, and then just single notes that are the melody line. So it was up to us up to me as leader in rehearsal to decide how we were going to go about actually arranging it and orchestrating it to take it from just, some notes and chord symbols on a page and actually make an arrangement, make a musical piece out of it. So this is the kind of arranging, this is one of two kinds of arranging, which is, bringing in a simple sheet and then kind of going through it in person and talking things through with the band in the moment. I'll show you another chart coming up, which is more involved arranging that I did for On the Trail, where I have each instrument written out, different parts, and it's much more specific. But this is one of two ways that I went about arranging pieces on this album. So this is an example of the more involved kind of arranging I mentioned. This is my chart for On the Trail. As you can see, there are 4 individual instruments listed out on the score. Drums are not included because I'm the drummer and I knew what I wanted, but the purpose of this arrangement is to show the other musicians what I'm hearing in my head. So as you can see, the piano and the bass have, in addition to chord symbols above the measures, they just have slash marks largely. What that means is because the pianist and the bassist are both far more proficient at their instruments than I am, I didn't want to hinder their musicality or to impose some inferior, note selections on them than what they could come up with on their own. So I simply gave, in the case of the bass player and the pianist for part of the score, I simply gave them the chord changes, and that allows them to know where they are in the harmony, but to also be free to kind of navigate, pick their own note choices. For example, the bass player is all about voice leading and laying out a foundation of the harmony that the rest of the instruments can build upon. And the bassist knows a lot more about voice leading and the intricacies of harmony than I do. So I don't want to give him note choices that would be worse than something he could pick. I simply give him the chord changes and he can do the rest. And that's pretty cool. That's a perk of having good musicians. The pianist is kind of the same deal, since it's a chordal instrument and they're largely playing chords if they're not soloing or playing the melody. But if you look to the second page of the score, this is not the complete score. This is just the first page and actually the third page. I just took some bits and pieces. The piano has some specific notes written out in the treble clef. That's actually during the bridge of the song. The tenor saxophone takes the melody as opposed to in the first part of the song where the trumpet's playing melody and the tenor sax has what are called backgrounds written out, which is just kind of an underlying melody line that kind of works as a nice counterpoint. During the bridge, the saxophone takes the melody, the trumpet plays little fills that I didn't write out because I wanted to leave that to the discretion of the trumpeter, and I gave the piano the little background melody that the trumpet has during the first part. So I don't know if that was too wordy or confusing, but this is just kind of an example of a bit more involved arranging where each instrument gets their own part written out and they get their own score. This is everything combined, obviously. And it's just a bit more involved and specific as opposed to the arrangement of Tad's Delight. But the result is an arrangement just the same. And finally, just to give you an example of what one of my own compositions looked like on paper, this is the piano chart for my composition Olivia. So as you can see, similarly to Tad's Delight, it has just the melody notes and the chords written above the measures. You may notice the letters A, B, and C, and D. Those are called rehearsal marks. Those just make it easier during rehearsal or just after a take. You can say, during letter C in the fourth measure, that chord was wrong. It makes it a lot easier to navigate the roadmap, if you will, on the chart than just having to count measures. And the last thing I'll say about this arrangement, so if you look at the very end, that's just the end of the melody, and if you listen to the first melody of the recording, that's essentially what is played. At the very end of the song, there's a different ending. There's something that the trio, the three of us, worked out in the recording studio just on the spot. We didn't improvise the ending, but we talked about it before recording it. It wasn't something that I wrote out because I figured that with our 3 collective minds put together, we'd be able to come up with something better than just me on my own in my bedroom. So that's what we did, and I think it worked out nicely. But this is an example of one of my own compositions on paper that the musicians just were handed and had to record, and you can listen to the recording and see how it came out. And finally, just some reflections to wrap up. I know I've gone on a little while. This has certainly given me a greater appreciation and understanding for composing and arranging and band leading as well. There is certainly quite a bit of responsibility that comes along with each of those roles. And this has been my first time taking them on, so it's been certainly a learning experience. But in the months that have passed since the recording session, since the writing process, I've only gone deeper into all three of those realms, and it's been a very rewarding process. And I think that this marks the beginning of a new journey for me as a composer and arranger. I've been a musician and a drummer for many years, but I think this is kind of the beginning of a new era that's being ushered in, and I'm glad that I had my performing and literary arts thesis to thank for kind of being the catalyst for me. So that wraps up my video presentation. I hope it wasn't too wordy or long, and thank you for watching.